Hey again, everyone. I'm back with Judith. And today, Judith, we're going to talk about something that one of the viewers had put up as a question. We've already talked about separation agreements.
Yeah.
What the question is specifically is what actually should be going into a separation agreement? And I thought this was a good question. And I thought, we can talk a little bit about this. So I think, just turn it over to you. What are your thoughts? What do you think needs to be in there? Like if there's a must have, maybe one or two things that are in there, what would you think they should be?
Well, first of all, people need to know what a separation agreement is. It's when, in terms of when you go through a divorce, I find you look at it as if you're dissolving a business where you have an agreement where everything is detailed. So it's the same as a separation agreement in a divorce. So
Yeah.
things you're going to be looking at in a separation agreement is, your basics. It's basically if there's children involved, you go into how parenting is going to go, who's getting what for holidays and things like that. Also, spousal support and child support. So there is an application out there that the the Family Law Act goes through, where it's a table where you put in the
So
income
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. So
table.
I think sorry to cut you off there. I think we'll put in the link here to our previous video where we walk through the basics of what a separation agreement is and why it's important. I think that further what you're saying, if there is children involved, there's additional requirements, parenting and child custody, whatever, like who's getting who when, and support, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the home, the assets, are there any specific clauses that you think people should be aware of or any best practices? Let's assume that there's one or more properties involved. And I mean, in this particular case, the client or the viewer, they put a scenario together and they said that they had one person owning, like they both own their own places, for instance, right? And they sold their properties and then they pooled their down payment together. So each person came in with sorry, not with one, but with a certain amount of money, right? And I think that one person was throughout the relationship working a little bit less due to seasonality in their employment. So given this scenario, I don't believe there's children involved.
Okay.
I think the question that comes, or if we break it down, the root of the question is how do they divide the asset, right?
Well, there's with property division, there's two categories. So there's excluded property, and then there's family property. So if a couple comes in with, say, they both owned property beforehand, that's considered excluded property. And if they combine that, then any increased value on top of their excluded value is family property. So that would be divided. So in a divorce, each couple would, or each spouse would go their separate ways with their excluded property. And then they would split the family property, the increased value.
Okay, so the excluded property, let's say we didn't get any numbers, specific numbers, but let's just say one person came in with 300,000 and the other person came in with 200,000. The division would be based off of the original person walking away with their original 300, assuming that the property value had increased or stayed the same and not gone down, right?
Yeah.
So initially, when you're going in, you walk out with what you went in with, and then you split the difference. So if this property was $1 million now, that's what we get after paying off the mortgage, after paying off the real estate fees, all of that stuff. The division would be 300, 200. So there's 500 gone. And then the rest of that 500 would be divided equally. So they get $250,000 each.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this would obviously, when they're coming to see you, this is already done, this is completed. But in your experience, and I mean, it's not necessarily done when they come and see us, because they might come and see us beforehand. So we might have to help, but usually a lawyer, or there's templates that you can find online that you don't necessarily want to rely on, but they're a good starting point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
mean,
think you also mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
sometimes a couple will come to me and go, well, where do I start with property division? So I would, recommend a mortgage broker like yourself, a lawyer as well. I do a bit of consulting as well, so to get them on the right track, get them in front of the professionals they need to see to make decisions.
Yeah, and I think it's good to have people that you know and trust, which we do, and that's part of the thing. Part of the benefits of connecting with us is we have people that we can put you in touch with, because there are people without a bunch of experience that are just going to try and bootstrap it all the way through, that I've seen as well, and that's not helpful at all. Okay, so in general, the analogy or the way to look at things here is similar to if you're dissolving a partnership in business, right?
Yeah.
And I think, again, as we talked about a little bit on our previous, when we got together and we were talking specifically about separation agreements, we were talking about having these conversations beforehand so that there's something that you can fall back on. There isn't like this big nasty dispute, right? It's always best to clarify up front. Now, in an ideal world, you would have something like this drafted up before you get into anything. That's not always possible. That's not always the case. But at least having some sort of conversation and having a mutual understanding, I think, at the very least, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You recommend?
Yeah. If you put a house for sale, you don't want to have it listed, have an offer come in, and then that's where disputes happen, where, who's getting what. And you can lose the buyer, you can be caught up in legalities with the buyer then if things go, off track.
If you're delayed or if they're going sideways.
Yeah, so I would again recommend getting something in writing, even if you don't have a separation agreement, but something that you can draft up with a lawyer of how the property is going to be divided. Or if you have other properties like investment properties, like just sit down and get it on paper.
Yeah, and an important thing to note, when you have a property listed for sale and you accept an offer, there's no going back for you. If the buyers remove subjects, it's a firm deal. So before you get to that point of accepting an offer, you have to have your ducks in a row, because you can't go back.
No.
And also, if you don't have your ducks in a row, you're going to have a hard time. It's pretty much impossible for a lawyer to accept and execute on a sale when they know that there's a dispute, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
And I think I said that in the other video too, that, if you don't have your ducks in a row and you don't have an agreement, a real estate lawyer is going to have a hard time, doing the sale and dividing what needs to be divided.
Yeah. So I think ideally, if you're heading into this relationship, marriage, you want to have these types of conversations. That would be perfect world, ideal scenario. The next best thing is when you're deciding on separating, to start hashing the financial things out right away, and at least get something on maybe a little bit more than a napkin, but get something so that you're both on the same.
Yeah, a napkin can work too. So anything in writing. So it just makes it easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other things that you think that it's important to mention, sort of should ask questions, if you will?
Well, I mean, also, like if you're doing a separation agreement, I always tell my clients to seek legal advice. I mean, you can go sit down and write it all down, but who knows the law better than a lawyer, right? So go see a lawyer and make sure that you have everything that's in place, like through the Family Law Act, because that's the big act that tells you how things are done in a divorce.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is from the financing side of things, when you're looking at these agreements, lenders are not quite fluid in their policies. A few years ago, we were getting a lot of pushback from lenders on separation agreements that were recognized by BC courts, where technically you can go in and you can put a separation agreement together and it's legal and accepted by the province if you've got two witnesses, right? But I think that some of the lenders were looking at this and they said that, no, we want this notarized. We want a lawyer to sign off on this. They've taken a stance, and I went through this in the last video, they've taken a softer stance on it in recent experience. But these were deal breakers when we were trying to get some financing in place. And then, of course, if you go back and try and retroactively get this agreement signed by someone who didn't oversee it, are you going to be willing to put your name on something that you didn't oversee, right? So I think best practice, seek a professional and get the professional to review it and sign off on it. I think also important to note that I think you had mentioned there's some services that cities offer, right? Take advantage of those.
Yeah.
And just reach out to a professional. I mean, on the grand scheme of things, something like this isn't going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah.
But it could end up.
There's lots of ways. I mean, a justice counselor will help you with mediation. They can also draw up a separation agreement for you. If you would get the separation agreement done, you just take it to a lawyer and get it signed.
Exactly,
So
and you're going to save.
cheap way. And there's also at the courthouse, there's legal aid. If you need to ask any questions, legal questions, there's lots of services out there for that.
So lots of services from the sounds of it. And I think that if there's anybody out there that has any questions, reach out to Judith. She's got information on this. And you know, Judith, we can probably go into the comment section and share some links as well for people to connect. I think ultimately the common sense approach to like it just applies here, right? Like what should you be including? Well, what is going to be a part of like the assets if there's children involved? It's really a common sense thing. And again, we've got things online we can rely on in the forms of templates, right? And
Yeah.
if there's any questions to summarize, just reach out to one of us. We can point you in the right direction. Anything else to add?
Well, another thing to add with the separation agreement that hasn't been mentioned is debts. So yes, you might have a house to sell. Yes, you might get equity out of it, but then there's those debts that you have to pay as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I think that in this scenario they didn't mention any debts, but yeah, just as important as the assets is the debts. Like who's getting the car, who's responsible for the car loan, is there is there credit card, right?
Yeah, all important.
So yeah, all important things. And again, it's, I mean, I don't know. Do you have a checklist that you've developed for something like this? Probably not. I don't think, right? I don't have one.
No, because again, I mean, every divorce is different. Everybody's
Exactly.
situation is different, so it's hard to get a checklist. But
Yeah.
I mean, there's the basics, and I kind of go off that. And the services are great. I mean, I've had questions myself where I've had clients. I've went to the courthouse and went to legal aid and asked some lawyers questions. They're absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to hear that there are lots of resources. I think that's it for this one. We'll wrap it up. We'll be back here next week and we'll talk about a few other questions that have popped up as well. And yeah, I guess enjoy the rest of your week.
You as well.
Take care.